What's going on, college football fans? It's that time again. It's time for the first and long college football show. I am your co-host, Marcus. There's your other co-host, Mason. Mason, how you doing today on the 28th day of February?
I'm doing good. It's hard to believe. It's the end of the month already, but here we are. We're stepping into March, and it's time. Well, first of all, probably one of my most favorite times in the NFL, and we don't talk NFL here, y'all, very much, but we got the NFL Combine starting tomorrow, and I'm excited for that. I love There's two things that I love about the NFL the most, and those are the Combine and the draft, because we get to see what these college players are going to do, what kind of physical freaks they are. We get to kind of think of how they'll fit into a system for NFL teams, and we get to see kind of what they get paid, pretty much, and we get to see all their hard work pay off. But outside of the draft, the combine is a very, very fun time for me. I know we'll probably get into that a little bit more next week after we see kind of the results, and we'll have some reaction to some of those results, and we'll see kind of how these players do. But outside of that, we've also got spring football heating up, and we're going to start getting some answers to some questions. There's not a ton to glean from spring football. If you're a fan of a team and you're hearing whispers about a player who's doing good in practice, they're probably going to contribute, right? An up and coming freshman, maybe a sophomore, or maybe it's a late blooming senior filling a position of need. Those are exciting moments in college football for fans. Some of the best moments come from spring for some players, but yeah, it's an exciting time. I'm excited to talk about it with you. What do we have on the agenda for today, Mark?
Well, we've got some news at a Rocky Top. Tennessee jumping off the top rope with the people's elbow on the NCAA. We're going to talk about what that means for some of the other college football teams that are going to be going through this thing in their respective states, and what it means for college football as a whole. The Big Ten and SEC seem to be forming some type of alliance, Dwight Schrute and Jim Halpert style. Is it good or bad for college football? We're going to discuss that. The coaching carousel continues to spin into the 11th hour here of the offseason. As you just talked about, we're about to begin spring, and we're just now figuring out some of the who's coaching what positions at some big schools, some small schools. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to continue our 2024 schedule previews. We're going to be looking over the Texas Longhorns and the South Carolina Cockies. So let's jump into it without further ado. We just talked about.
Is that what we're going with for South Carolina? The Cockies?
Cockies.
Is that okay? They're the Cockies.
That's their mascot's name. It's Cocky.
Is it?
Cocky the Cock.
The Cocky Gamecocks. Interesting.
And look, if you want to watch all the clean versions of our videos, no,
there are none.
we
listen to Josh Pate.
We do whatever the hell. Yeah, exactly. You can go watch Disney college football show. Now we're these live shows. We just kind of have our fun and we talk our shit, and then we clip them into smaller clips, put them out on the channel, and try to get those to trend. So anybody watching this live, you're a real one, dude. You're a real one. And since you're such a real one, hit that thumbs up button for us, please, and help us out and help get the word out, the good word of the college football show that is First and Long. All right. Tennessee gets a big win in their case against the NCAA. And it comes way of the U.S. District Judge there out of Tennessee. The judge granted an injunction, which stops the NCAA from enforcing any rules to do with NIL until this investigation is over, basically. So with that being said, I believe this opens the door for a lot of litigation to come forward from this, not just in Tennessee and Virginia where this was filed, but across the country. I think this is, I mean, I'm no lawyer. I'm no law expert. Okay. That's not my claim to fame by any means, but whenever you put something on the books in that world, in the judicial world, the legislative world, and you set precedents, typically you're going to see other courts follow that precedence more likely than not, right? So we've got a court now that's kind of paving the way, Tennessee paving the way for the rest of college football to kind of, I think, weasel their way out of some of these rules that the NCAA kind of decides one day or the next if they're going to enforce them or not. So with all that being said, what do you think this means for college football? And is it good or bad, indifferent? What do you think?
Well, I just heard that Greg Byrne, the Alabama AD, just came out and said that this means that NIL plays a role in recruiting from now on. It does open that can of worms, which really doesn't change much. I don't know that any plugged in fan is listening to that and going, "Oh my gosh, the world's going to end in college football." Right?
Yeah.
That's not news. But first of all, this was Greg Byrne probably taking a little jab at the Alabama boosters and saying like, "Hey, we kind of need you guys to help us recruit. You can do that. Just open your wallet up." But also, I think he's also right in saying that, in addressing it publicly and saying that this is what college football has become. What is it? My question is, what is this NCAA versus Tennessee case going to unfold into the future? And are we going to see players becoming employees, which is, it seems like it's predetermined at this point that that's eventually where we're going to go. And I'm anxious. I'm asking you what do you think is going to happen in the future?
Well, I think that there's still a lot that's got to be figured out with this thing, Mason. I mean, we're just at the beginning of all of this stuff. Now, this injunction was a big deal in the fact that it takes all the teeth out of the NCAA's mouth in this situation. So, look, the NCAA has been a very poor representative of this sport. And what I mean by that is the NCAA has shown no leadership. They're inept in controlling these conferences. These conferences are each their own league, and that's why this sport is so unique. I mean, the NFL, you've got 32 teams, and they're all in one league. They're in different divisions and conferences, but you've got one league, and in college football, you've got over 130 teams, and we had five power conferences up until recently, and now all of a sudden it seems like we have two. So we're going to talk later in the show about the Big Ten and the SEC forming an alliance and aligning their views together, and I think it has a lot to do with the NCAA's ineptability to do what's best for the sport or govern the sport in any way. So I think we're just getting more and more towards like a Wild West type situation where we're going to have conferences doing their own thing. I wish we could get some kind of college football commissioner that actually would do something for the sport. And that sounds like the beginning of every like every dictator regime, right? It's like, I wish we had one guy that could just control everything for us. But
I mean, there's a newly inactive head coach that was the winningest coach in college football history that could potentially fill that role. I'm not like, saying anybody in particular, but Nick Saban could do it. So, and I'd be happy. Nick Saban would be a great dictator. I'd love it. I'd live in that world,
He's a lot like a dictator in the fact that he's like 5'3.5", right? Yep. And those are the most powerful leaders, bro. Those are the most powerful leaders. They rule with an iron fist.
Well, I think that's why, I'm 5'6", and people say I'm just such a good leader. I think that's probably part of
it. Yeah, they do call you Maison Napoleon. Maison. I just honestly, I mean, I'm ready for somebody to take some control here. And as I said, we're going to talk about the SEC and Big Ten Alliance. Let us know in the comment section what you think this means for college football as a whole. I just think it's another sign of the NCAA losing their grip, and we're just kind of watching the cheese fall right off the cracker for NCAA and their reign on college football. We just saw a court case in West Virginia a few months ago, and this was to do with basketball, but it was same type situation where it was the state of West Virginia filing a complaint in court basically about not allowing these kids to transfer more than one time, and saying that it was unfair, and the court ruled in favor of West Virginia. And ruled against the NCAA there. So we're just seeing this happen more and more. And I think this is just the precipice of it. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really don't want to hear anything about transfer rules when coaches also do not honor their commitments to programs, right? They leave all the time. We're going to talk about that later in the show about all the coaching moves that have occurred as of late, and it is late, but I don't want to hear anything about players not being able to transfer as many times as they want when coaches aren't held to that same standard. And I shouldn't say that. I don't want to hear any coaches complain about it, right? Until they're also, honoring their contracts and their agreements, because it is an agreement, right? It's the same type of agreement that players sign, that coaches sign, and they leave and walk out of their agreements all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to our SEC and Big Ten Alliance talk, because I think that kind of leads us in, and it kind of was leading my thoughts into this next topic anyway. So the Big Ten and the SEC are looking to form an alliance, and we're here today to talk about whether that's good or bad for college football. But let's talk about what the Big Ten and the SEC are eyeing first. So one of the first matters of business between this alliance is calendars. What can we do to make the college football calendar more inclusive to head coaches and better for the sport? So what we're proposing, and by we I mean Big Ten and SEC, what we're proposing for college football here is an earlier signing day, right after conference championships, right? And then 2 more like we've already got them, basically. So you would have an early signing day, and then your February signing day. Does that sound right?
So what I'm, just to kind of further elaborate, what I'm hearing is a June signing day.
Right.
What the SEC is proposing is a post regular season signing day before you get so after the last, and it might be conference. I don't know if it's to include conference championships or not, but after the last regular season
it's
FBS
before conference
game is
championships
played, right? You have a signing day.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that, because the teams that are in conference championships are probably like, we're trying to get ready to win our freaking conference championship, which still matters, right? It should still matter, right? I would vote towards the week after the conference championship personally, but that's the second one, and then the normal February window would be the third one. I'm not smart enough to figure out like really what would make the most sense, right? That ultimately the coaches are trying to get players to sign early because it allows them to focus their attention and time on players who have not signed yet, right? And so a June signing day makes a ton of sense, because you get these players who really want to be with your program. You already kind of know what your roster is going to look like. You can start focusing on other players. The having one in the middle or at the end of the season, the regular season, kind of makes more sense than where it's at now, I think. But you're really just adding a June window for the most part.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's not about the players. It's about the coaches not having to spend as much time and effort and resources and money re-recruiting the same guys who they already know are coming to their program, or they would know if they've signed a letter of intent. For the players, I'm still saying wait till February. Like I know they're 17 and 18-year-old kids, and it's tough to be patient at that age. It's still tough to be patient at 32, but you might as well wait, because you're not going to get anything different out of it unless you're enrolling early, right? Then you would do the December signing day, but outside of that, there's no point in signing early, because all you're doing is limiting your dollar amount for the most part when it comes to NIL. But that's my understanding of how it's broken down. Did I do a decent job?
Yeah, I think that is what I was kind of envisioning there, and what I had kind of read. It's confusing, all these dates that keep getting thrown in there, because now you're right. This is for the coaches. Now there's recruiting dead periods that they're proposing as well. Longer dead periods in between there, or something or another. And I understand what this is about. This is about retaining talent. Coaches are wanting to retain the talent on their football team, but these conferences have to retain the talent that they have at these coaching positions. We're seeing more and more guys taking off to the NFL and saying, you know what? And we're even seeing it in college football. We're seeing some head coaches at big programs in college football saying, you know what? I'll just go be a tight ends coach. I'll just go be a tight ends coach. I'll make $250,000 a year or more, and I don't have to worry about things as much. Or coaches saying, I'll go to this smaller school where I'm not fighting the NIL stuff quite as much, and I'm not quite as worried about getting these 5 stars, to my school. So I think that this scheduling thing, the whole idea of it is to help these coaches out and help retain some of these coaches from going off to the NFL and wherever else they're going into retirement and things like that. It's just, I wish we could just figure out one day to do all the signing. I get what they're doing. I understand, but it's like, why couldn't we just, I thought everything was fine in February, letting the guys sign in February, but I know they want to get kids in school early and things like that, but man, it's getting more and more complicated. And now you've got the NFL executives getting pissed off too. So now we're going to have issues as far as television and getting these things televised. So the college football schedule, college football playoff games will be played before Christmas. And so the NFL's like, wait a minute, that was our weekend right there. There wasn't no big college football games going on. And so now you got TV networks arguing about who's paying who what. So the timing, and we've been saying it on this show for a few months now. I feel like the timing is off on multiple things. It's not just the recruiting calendar. It's scheduling for the season and everything. I like the schedules better this year. We've got 2 bye weeks. Everybody's got 2 bye weeks. I think that's important when we're adding games, possibly adding games to schedules. So with all that being said, what do you think? I'm trying to figure out what the Big Ten and the SEC, what's the thing that they need to tackle next? What's good about this alliance for college football, and what could possibly be bad for it? Obviously, this alliance, the Big Ten and the SEC, could be bad for the ACC and the Big 12. I think that's I don't think that it's like a spiteful thing, them banding up, and I don't think there's sole reason for banding together is to pound the ACC and the Big 12. But I think that is an indirect result of these two pairing up and throwing their weight around the room. So is this good or bad for college football? And what do you think is next for the Big Ten and the SEC as they try to align their views for the betterment of their two conferences?
Yeah. I don't think it's bad necessarily. I think if you're a fan of a school that's not going to be in the future Big Ten and SEC, it could be bad, right? You're not in the upper echelon, of conferences. If let's just say conference 1 is going to be the Big Ten and the SEC, conference 2 is going to be a combination of the Big 12, the ACC, and maybe some group of 5 teams, right? So you've got 2 separate conferences. And by the way, I'm also assuming that the SEC and Big Ten conference 1, they go out and get other teams, right? They get some Big 12 teams, they get some ACC teams, some of those bigger teams, and create this, mega conference, right? And kind of create like a Premier League for, if you're a soccer fan, you kind of understand that there are levels and tiers to the leagues. So it's good for those teams that would be included in the conference 1. It's also good for the teams that are not competitive in the current college football playoff as it stands. They're not going to win that championship, but they could be in a conference too, right? I'm thinking like maybe at Oklahoma State or maybe SMU, UCF. There are plenty of programs out there that could benefit from a competitive standpoint from being in a lesser league and can kind of dominate a lesser league. Now, right now, you do still have the FCS. We're talking about a different level of player from FBS Conference 2 to FCS champion. Like that's still a pretty big gap in talent and on-field results. So I tend to be more in favor of the Big Ten and the SEC creating some sort of mega conference in a way. I think that I'm in favor really of the 5 conferences that we had just like a year ago. But that is we're not putting that back in Pandora's box. Like that's not going to happen. So if you're going to give me what we have now and some like weird version of a Power 4 conference that's not really what it is, or this mega conference between the Big Ten and the SEC, I'm going to take the latter. And I think that what's going to come from this is a better product on the field. I think that you're going to have better games in the regular season. And if they can figure out in their own conference, right, in this utopian college football conference, right, if they can figure out how to make the regular season games matter, because that's how it's always been in college football, but still have some form of a playoff system, then I think that we would have an elite conference and the best product that sports can provide in all of sports, not just college or collegiate sports, but in all of sports. I think that I really believe in college football that much.
Well, yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there. We just got done talking about how we wish there was some type of leadership in college football. And I think this is a form of that leadership. I think this is the type of leadership that we're going to need. We need the big boys to step up. And one of the things that they're going to be pushing for, and by they, I mean the Big Ten and the SEC, as they are going to be throwing weight around. I'm going to probably use that phrase a lot over the next few months. I think we are right on the precipice of like some playoff games being played for free. Like the schedule is binding here. We've got to figure something out. This current playoff format that we have is only good through 25, and it takes multiple years to plan out these college football playoff games, the venues, everything that goes into this stuff. It's not done on a few months' notice. The TV contracts, all that stuff. So we're really in a situation where we've got to start getting stuff figured out. And I think the Big Ten and the SEC kind of realize that, and it's like, look, let's band together and try to push our weight around in the college football playoff committee meetings, and let's get to where we need to be with automatic bids. The SEC and the Big Ten want more than one automatic bid. That's going to be one of the first things that they're going to go after this whole schedule change thing. And I think, by the way, the whole schedule change thing, I think is going to happen. And it's not just going to happen in the the big boy conferences. It's going to be all throughout college football. There's going to be tons of committee meetings coming up, and people are going to be voting on this stuff and trying to figure out what's best for their conference and their teams and things. But we need leadership like this. We need these two power. I don't know what we're going to call them. We got to come up with a cool name for these two. The power two, that's lame as hell. I don't know. We got to come up the terrible. No, they're not the terrible two.
It's up to us, right?
The
to
terrific
get this
two,
name right.
The terrific two. That's what we'll go with that until something else comes up better.
Yeah, we'll come up with something next week.
Yeah, salt and pepper. No,
yeah.
Peanut and jelly.
Yeah.
We need
Fire
them to step
and
up.
ice.
Fire and ice. There you go. Who's ice though? I don't. Let's see how this goes. I think that this is a good thing. College football is changing a lot. We need the leadership to change with it. The NCAA obviously has no legal leg to stand on. So we need somebody who we know can enforce things and have a voice for college football. And I think that that's these conference commissioners at this point. So I think that this is overall a good thing for college football. Anything else to add to that, Mason?
Not at this time. This is I feel like we're going to be talking about this almost every single week until games are being played. But just because this is the moment where this is the apex of college football, right? And it's going to keep growing, right? And we're going to have a new apex, and then we're going to have a new apex, and it's you've got these waves, right? And it seems like over the past couple of years, we have really been riding some pretty big waves in the off season.
Yeah. A lot going down, man. It's interesting stuff. We've got like a reality show going on here. And before we get into the next topic, we're on our live show, so we can talk about stuff in between these topics. You guys shoot us a comment if you want to comment on any of that stuff, or just say hey, or kiss my foot, or I liked your video a lot, or something like that. We appreciate you guys watching. Did you see what Paul Johnson was saying about Jeff Collins?
No.
Oh my goodness. So Paul Johnson goes on a radio show the other day, and I mean, Paul Johnson at this point is just an old man that just plays golf around his mountain.
Pretty good golfer, right? I think he's pretty good golfer.
I think a pretty decent golfer. Probably not as good. He's like a Donald Trump golfer. It's like It looks weird, but he can do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, he goes on a radio show this past week, I guess, and boy, he was asked about Jeff Collins, and my goodness, he just let him have it, dude. He was just like, he didn't say SOB, but basically like this dude just told everybody that I basically did a horrible job at Georgia Tech. We didn't have any players. That wasn't true. He talked about how all the coaches, after they played Jeff, would call him and laugh and say that, the cheeses fell off the cracker at Tech. He said that one ACC coach went in there and beat them real bad in Atlanta. He didn't say what team it was, but they said at the end of the game, we lined up in your old formation just to rub it in their face. And we as college football fans, we don't get the all 22 film or nothing like that. So we wouldn't see something like that necessarily or notice it when it happened. But I can't wait to see. I want to know who it is. I want somebody to go back on those games and figure out who did that. Who was the asshole that lined up in Paul Johnson's formation, at the end of the game to rub it in Jeff Collins' face? I mean, that's just wild. And now you've got Jeff Collins as the defensive coordinator for the North Carolina Tar Heels this year, taking over for Gene Chizik. So,
well, I can tell you, we know it wasn't Mario Cristobal. He's off the list.
Yeah,
we know it wasn't him.
No, it was not him.
Was it Mac Brown? It wasn't Mac Brown.
Yeah, man. I don't know, man. It was just wild.
That is
Paul
crazy, though.
Johnson, I think he was always a pretty fiery guy, but man, he's still got some fire in the belly, dude. Uh, dude's got a motor on him, bro. Old hog jaws.
He needs to go coach Army or something.
That would be a
Release
good
Jeff
idea.
Monken.
Georgia Tech should have never got rid of him. What the hell? They're Georgia Tech. It's gonna be a long time before they're back, dude.
Really? You know where he should go and just be an OC at? It's freaking Iowa. Like, why not? That would be scary.
Perfect.
That'd be scary.
That would be pretty rough on those Big Ten folks out there. My goodness. All right, let's jump into this coaching carousel stuff. We got a few little webs that we got to untangle here. The coaching carousel continues to turn into the 11th hour of the college football offseason. It's the offseason. There is no offseason anymore. And these coaching changes seems like they just get later and later and later. It was just a couple of days ago that we heard about James Coley going to UGA to coach wide receivers. James Coley just got hired at South Carolina. Hasn't even coached a game yet. Yeah. He was part of the Jimbo Fisher regime that was kicked out of Texas A&M there, Aggie land. And South Carolina scooped him up. And I'd already been watching press conferences, South Carolina talking about James Coley and his recruiting chops that he possesses in South Florida. And this is going to be great for the Gamecocks. And this guy comes with tons of experience. Shane Beamer had worked with him at UGA whenever James Coley was at UGA prior to this. And this was all made possible by Brian McClendon leaving UGA. He's now the ex wide receiver coach from UGA, is going to be the wide receivers coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So James Coley off to South Carolina, off to UGA from South Carolina without ever even coaching a game. And then you've got Josh Crawford coming in to coach running backs at UGA because Dell McGee is going to be the head coach at Georgia State. And the reason Dell McGee is going to be the head coach at Georgia State is because Georgia State's head coach, Sean Elliott, left to be at South Carolina. So we got a full circle here of coaches flip-flopping and causing dominoes to fall here late in February. What do you make of all this stuff? Who are the winners and losers here? I don't feel like, me personally, I don't feel like anybody really lost out in these deals. Obviously South Carolina lost Coley, but they also just got a head coach as their tight ends coach and a guy who has coached in South Carolina before. And, oh, by the way, his family lived there the whole time he coached at Georgia State. So who do you think won in this situation and who lost?
I think, all parties win, right? And also, I kind of think that in some way, like Kirby was like, "Hey, watch this. I'm gonna, Dale, you've been great to us. I'm gonna get you a head coaching job. Watch this. Let me hire James Coley, right? And then, McClendon goes to Tampa Bay, and and so, or maybe it was McClendon who threw the first marble or whatever you want to say, cast the first stone. That was the first domino to fall there." But it is kind of interesting. But when you look at it, at the end of the day, Brian McClendon goes to the NFL. And by the way, Todd Bowles, his son, plays for Georgia, is an inside linebacker for Georgia. And so you'd have to think at some point they cross paths. And, that's kind of how that relationship started. Really, a lot of this just kind of comes from UGA, and of course they're filling two of their positions in the process. But I think that Georgia got an upgrade in James Coley. I think, and I like Brian McClendon a lot, but from a recruiting perspective, which is what Kirby tends to go for with his assistant coaches, I think that James Coley is an upgrade from Brian McClendon in that regard. Look, James Coley was the guy who went out and got Isaiah Wilson, not just receivers now, but he went out and got Isaiah Wilson. He went out and got George Pickens. He got Amarius Mims, Kenny McIntosh. There are a number of players that James Coley had his hand in recruiting for Georgia, not just at the receiver position, but when you look at Georgia's roster over the past few years, really since James Coley left and since George Pickens, they have not recruited the wide receiver position that well. So I think that this is a pretty big position hire for Georgia. Obviously, Dell McGee getting the job at Georgia State, he gets to stay in state, which is actually really important because he has been an in-state employee, a state of Georgia employee for so long that he's almost vested. He's almost got 20 years now at this point. So I think that he really was like looking at his retirement and saying, it's actually going to be pretty sweet to be a vested employee of the state and stay in state and go coach at a school that his son plays at. His son is an incoming freshman, defensive back, I believe, or maybe a wide receiver, one of the skill positions. But so his son's going to be playing there. I mean, it's a big win for Dell McGee, right? He gets his first head coaching position. I think he's going to do well there. And then the only loser, I guess you could say, is South Carolina. I think that James Coley was a pretty big get for them for their recruiting efforts. And I think that it's going to be a step down for South Carolina. And unfortunately, somebody's got to lose something here. And I think that that's the big loser at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I think Georgia losing Brian McClendon kind of sucks, right? I mean, you don't ever want to lose continuity, lose a coach that you felt good about. I felt pretty good about where the wide receiver room was going at the University of Georgia. I feel like he's done a pretty good job. But yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. South Carolina needs to focus on recruiting, and they lost a really good recruiter in James Coley. I don't think Sean Elliott is quite the ringer that you're wanting to send to these kids' living rooms, right? So I definitely think South Carolina had, they lost a little something there. But as I said, Sean Elliott is a guy that his family still lives in Columbia. They never moved from there. So his kids have been going to school there the whole time. Like, they said that Sean Elliott, his son plays high school football, right? Sean Elliott never missed a game. Yeah, even as the head coach of Georgia State. So he would be back and forth to South Carolina just constantly, which I know is not far from Atlanta necessarily. Columbia's not too far, but I mean, it's more than just a little stroll down the road. So I think that they gain some function there in the fact that they've got a guy that really does love the program and is doing it for all the right reasons. He wants to be closer to his family. It's now, I think that Georgia State underperformed a little bit in some cases this past year, but it wasn't a guy that was about to get fired or anything like that. So I think that's a good pickup for South Carolina there, and they actually picked Sean Elliott up before this James Coley situation had taken place. So it was, you had a good thing happen and then you had a bad thing happen. So I think college football in this world, I think you just kind of want to mitigate disasters, right? I think you're just trying to stop the bleeding when something bad happens. Inevitably, you're going to have a decommitment. You're going to have a flip. You're going to have a coach leave. It's going to happen. But if you can jump on damage control quickly, then I think that makes a huge difference. And fighting the bad with the good is something that I think that Kirby Smart has done. For example, Kirby Smart has done really well at UGA. Every time you hear bad news, it's like, bam, good news in your face. And I think that, this worked out pretty well for all parties, I think. Thank you for watching the show Between the Numbers Sports Podcast. Thank you so much. We do appreciate it. Y'all think Eric B will be big for UCLA? So this is Eric Bieniemy. He was from the Commanders, right?
That's right.
And he will be the offensive coordinator and associate head coach for the UCLA Bruins. Look, I think UCLA, I think they got to get with the times. And I think this NIL situation at UCLA, I think the part of the reason that Chip Kelly wanted out, and this isn't the sole reason, it's not the only reason, but I think it is one of the reasons. He was kind of getting shunned by some of these boosters and things. There was kind of some cliques forming, from what I understand, in that booster club and sponsors there for that NIL system. So I think that Eric is going to have to get in there and lay some groundwork with these boosters, and if he can get them fired up, then I think that, as your NIL goes these days, so your roster goes. And I think it's going to be a couple of years of building up a roster before we're going to be able to really judge B&M by, how are we going to know? It's probably going to be pretty rough for a couple of years, don't you think?
I would think so. And when you look at this hire, I think UCLA has to feel pretty good about the hire. I think this is the only coaching move that I can think of where an NFL coach has come to college. This is a guy who coached at UCLA. He was there from 03 to 05 at UCLA as a running backs coach, and also someone who won a few championships with the Kansas City Chiefs, where he was the offensive coordinator for 5 seasons. So I think that's a pretty big selling point if you're UCLA and you are pitching your product, your school, to a recruit, especially on the offensive side of the football, especially at the quarterback position, when Eric can go in home to these bigger recruits than what UCLA is used to getting and saying, yeah, I coached Patrick Mahomes. I coached Travis Kelce. I coached Tyreek Hill. That matters to these recruits. On the flip side, you look at what he did with Washington, and it wasn't very good. So maybe him having Patrick Mahomes kind of made the offense what it is, and being under Andy Reid, maybe that was a little bit more of what really was happening. And I think that some of the shine on Eric was starting to wear off, and he needed a refresh, an update, and a restart. I think coming down to the college ranks is kind of where he'll find that. And also UCLA is getting, I think, a plus higher for this position for UCLA. And this may be the start of them joining the Big Ten and, kind of figuring things out and putting their money where their mouth is and trying to be relevant in a new conference.
And they're going to be able to put a lot more money where their mouth is because they're going to be getting paid a lot more money. Mm-hmm. This new contract that starts up, including UCLA, is gonna pay them right around $100 million a year once they get into the full swing of that contract. So that is a very, very big get financially for the UCLA Bruins, and I think a big get as a coach who has been with the Kansas City Chiefs, the Commanders, my goodness, Minnesota Vikings. He's coached at UCLA before as a running backs coach. So at twice, 2 different times. So this is a guy that knows the program. I think it's best case scenario for UCLA, considering I imagine it was probably a shock to some that Chip Kelly would leave and take an offensive coordinator position. But I think it's a perfect fit for Chip Kelly, and I think this is a perfect fit for UCLA. And I think Chip Kelly actually probably did UCLA a favor. I think that they did them a favor in the fact that they're not going to have to owe him any money, and it frees UCLA to move on and whenever, which I think they were going to do anyway. So this, I think, worked out very, very well for the Bruins. And thank you again for watching, as that was not one of our show topics today, but if you comment it, we'll talk about it. Let's jump into some schedule previews. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do it.
We have got the Texas Longhorns and the South Carolina Cockies. So let's jump into our Texas schedule first, because I think I can speak for everybody. Texas is one of the most exciting teams going into 2024. Fresh off a loss in the college football playoff to Washington, who eventually lost to Michigan, a game that really came down to the wire. It looked like there for a second in that excuse me, not the Rose Bowl, the was it the Fiesta Bowl? It looked like they were about to win the dang thing. I mean, they marched down the field and couldn't get it done. Washington wins the game. Texas now has lost some pretty serious talent and then reloaded in some other areas. So I'm interested to talk some deficiencies in this roster as we know it now. I mean, we haven't even been through spring practice. We don't know. We don't know exactly. You know, the ins and outs of every position for every team yet, obviously, but we can project some things. So as we put the Texas schedule there up on the screen, one of my biggest concerns for these new teams coming into the SEC was line of scrimmage. Texas was a team last year that actually allowed a pretty good number of sacks. The offensive line was good at times, not great ever. I don't think it was ever really great. This year, Texas will be returning 4 out of 5 starters on that offensive line. I think that's a big deal. I think they need to continue to bulk up some, but returning 4 out of 5 guys on the O-line, O-line is one of those positions that you will continue to grow throughout your career in college. And if you're just in your first or second year, especially in a Steve Sarkisian system, you're going to struggle. So I fully expect this offensive line to be better this year and protect Quinn Ewers better. Now, with that being said, I've got some questions at the running back position. Wide receiver is not going to be a question. It's just not going to be. Outstanding wide receivers at Texas through the transfer portal and recruiting and all that. They lose some great wide receivers, obviously, in A.D. Mitchell and Worthy, but then they just reload. So I'm not worried about the wide receiver position. Tight end will be another, I think, a little bit of an area of concern. I think when you lose a guy like Jatavian Sanders, you don't just reload at that position and be able to not miss a beat. I mean, that guy was way too good to just pick up where he left off. So I suspect that running back will be something that we need to keep an eye on in the spring, and I suspect tight end as well. And on defense, I think the back end of this defense got a lot better this offseason just by talent acquisition and just by getting more experience. But the defensive line, without a doubt, is without a doubt taking a step back. You lose Byron Murphy and you lose Sweat off of that defensive line. Now, I don't care what college football team you are, how good you recruited, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough to replace those guys, man. So who's got to step up? I think that there's a few really, really important players on this team that have got to step up. We talked about that offensive line. Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams, Kevin Banks and Cam Williams are 2 guys on that offensive line that are going to have to step up. Cam Williams has got to get bigger and more physical. Okay. If those 2 guys do what they need to do on the offensive line, we're going to see some improvement in those sack numbers. We're going to see improvement in the run game, all that good stuff. And then we got a guy named Sadir Mitchell that's going to be playing defensive tackle. We just talked about the shoes that he has to fill for this team. And it's I think a little bit unrealistic to say that the defensive line for Texas is going to be as good as it was last year. I don't think anybody can say that in their right mind. But with all that being said, I like the cornerback position. I like the safety position for this team. The linebacker position I think they bulked up and they got more numbers of good players and just overall better players at linebacker. So I think this is going to be more of a bend don't break style defense. I think you're going to be able to run the football on Texas a little bit, but I think that this is going to be a little tougher to throw the ball down the field on them. So with all that being said, what are your kind of initial thoughts before we head into spring on Texas, and then you want to take us through the schedule?
Yeah, later on in this offseason after spring training, I just want to kind of pitch this for everybody. We will be doing our breakdowns of every single team. We'll be doing a deep dive for ourselves to understand what to expect from these teams heading into the 2024 season. We have not done that yet. It's a little bit too early to do that, but we're going to have previews of each team, at least in the top 25 and some outside of that. We can only do so many, but Texas is certainly going to be on that list of teams that we break down, and I'm excited to do that. Heading into next season, I think you hit on a lot of key points. My biggest question is Texas going to replicate what they did last year and be a top 4 team by the end of the year, right? It's tough to do. And it was a lot easier with that defensive line that they had to stop the run. But if you'll remember, Texas was in a lot of close games last year in the Big 12. It was not pretty in some of those games. They had some pretty close, fourth quarter games against teams that they had no business being on the same field as. So I think heading into the SEC, I'm going to have that question for them for sure. Heading into the SEC, playing a more difficult schedule, undoubtedly, than what they faced in the Big 12. Not that all the Big 12 teams are bad. I'm not saying that it's not a good conference. It is, but undoubtedly they are going to have a tougher schedule this year than they had last year, and we can go line by line and check that. But
You said it now. You're going to be arguing with those Big 12 fans now, dude.
It is what it is.
They've been on my ass all week, dude.
Yep. Well, that's what
How
happens.
dare me.
That's what happens when you talk about the Big 12 and how uncompetitive they are, But anyways, back to Texas. So looking at this schedule, the first one that jumps out on the page, obviously, is Michigan. That's going to be one of the biggest games of the year. I am so excited to watch that game. I'm so excited to break that game down, talk about it. But what's interesting, you mentioned their passing defense. Hopefully it's gotten better. It looks like it has, but they are not going to be tested until probably Oklahoma, right? So they're going to have 5 games and a bye week to figure themselves out in their secondary. I don't see any other team on here that's going to really stretch the ball downfield. I don't think Michigan is going to just all of a sudden be that team, with probably Alex Orji playing quarterback. So that's good. That fits what they want. That fits what Texas wants. They want to work the kinks out, get their new players in, and figure a lot of this stuff out. But they are going to get tested on that defensive front against Michigan, and that is going to be interesting. I don't think Michigan will be as dominant of a running team as they were last year, but they're still going to be pretty dang good. So I think that you're going to answer some questions for me there against Michigan. And then really you've got Oklahoma and Georgia, and then basically 2 bye weeks, a third probably if Billy Napier's gone at Florida at this point. And then Arkansas should be a winnable game. Kentucky should be winnable. Texas A&M, maybe we got a good rivalry kind of coming back that, in a rivalry game in Mike Elko's last game of his first year, as head coach of Texas A&M. Maybe we've got a pretty competitive game there at the end. Maybe Texas A&M is playing spoiler at the end of the year, so that could be a really fun game to watch. But of this list, Mark, I mean, it seems like a pretty navigatable schedule, right? You get Georgia at home, which is really important. That's going to be a tough game. Like that to me is a coin flip game, right? especially because Texas is going to be playing at home. But is there a certain team on this schedule that you look at, a certain game, and you say, there's a trap game? That's a team that could upset Texas and ruin their chances of being a Final Four team in this playoff.
Yeah. Yeah, exciting schedule here. I mean, just the proposition of a big blue blood like Texas coming in the SEC is obviously exciting, and this schedule definitely puts you on the edge of your seat.
But is there, like, if you look at this schedule, is there one team that you look at and say, all right, Texas probably shouldn't lose to that game, but they might, because, is there something like
Absolutely.
that sticks out to you, like one team in particular?
Well, absolutely. Oklahoma. They lost to Oklahoma last year. Shouldn't have.
Mhm.
Oklahoma had no business winning that football game, but that's what neutral site rivalry games can give you. You know, and in the SEC, you just don't know. That game against Kentucky,
Mhm.
that is a trap game if I've ever seen one. You're coming off of a road game at Arkansas, which you never go play at, and then you're gonna have to play Kentucky at home, and then go on the road the very next week to play Texas A&M. That's a busy last 3 weeks of that schedule. So, and especially if you're sitting there thinking about, say Texas only has one loss, or even say they have no losses even. Think about the pressure that's going to be built up on this Texas team coming down to those last couple of games. So yeah, absolutely. There are some games that can jump up and bite the Texas Longhorns. And you just said it. There were close games last year that Texas had no business making a game with some of these teams. Okay. So who's to say that Florida doesn't put it together one week?
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Who's to say that Vandy doesn't? No, I'm just kidding. Not me. I ain't gonna do you like that, Texas Longhorns fans. I'm just kidding. Y'all gonna beat the shit out of Vandy. Um, but you get my point. There are lots of trip up points throughout an SEC schedule for every single team.
Yeah.
It's there's going to be all kinds of trap games in store, and it's always the games that you're not expecting, or the weeks you're not expecting there to be any crazy games like that, and then it's like, whoa, everybody in the top 10 won by 7 points or less this week, and it's like, yeah, because nobody was putting their focus on this week. Everybody's thinking about the next week, and that's kind of the beauty, the ugly beautifulness of college football, right? It's an imperfect sport. It's 18 to 21-year-old dudes out there, that don't all have their head on all the way, just like most 18 to 21-year-olds don't. So yeah, there's lots of room for error. And I just want to kind of talk on one more thing, and then we'll move on to South Carolina if you're ready. But the whole Big 12 thing. We put a video out last week, and if you haven't went and watched it, I hope that you will go and watch it. And I tried to be as objective as I could in this video, in the fact that I don't dislike the Big 12, y'all. I don't dislike the Big 12. I think that the Big 12, and we said in that video last week that it would be a very, very interesting conference. But there are a lot of people that have loyalty to that conference because it brings back a lot of good memories for a lot of people, I think. But we had talked about how we didn't feel like the Big 12 was relevant in the national championship conversation. And I'm going to tie this back into the Texas schedule in here. Texas made their way to a college football playoff berth through the Big 12 last year. It's going to be a lot harder to do that in the SEC this year. Now, there's 12 teams, so that I guess in that sense it makes it easy. But getting in those top 4 spots, 5 spots, is going to be really, really tough. It's going to be very, very difficult. And as good as Texas was last year, I think they're going to have to be better this year to be able to get into one of those top 4 or 5 spots. What we saw last year, I think, was a stepping stone for this Steve Sarkisian team. But we're going to need to see Quinn Ewers take it to the next level. He's got to be a Heisman contender, man. He has to
Yeah.
be.
See,
If this,
sorry, not
no,
to
you're
cut
good.
you off. What's interesting, you just kind of brought up a point that just made me think of this. Um, if this was a 12-team playoff last year, would Texas have ended up being a top 4 team? Because we already know Washington was better than them. I'm pretty sure that Michigan was better than them, right? I'm pretty sure maybe. Well, we did see them beat Alabama, so I can't say Alabama was better than them. I'm pretty sure Georgia was better than them. Ohio State might have been better than them.
Yeah.
That's 4 teams right there. So they may not have been a top 4 team in a 12-team playoff last season. So that, yeah, I agree with you. They do need to get better.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was just kind of trying to tie that in with my Big 12 talk because I'm still going through comments of Big 12 fans that are saying, we're crazy for saying the Big 12 is kind of irrelevant. But my thoughts are without Oklahoma and without Texas, they are a little bit irrelevant in the national spotlight. But I digress. Please go back and watch that video if you haven't. It's a good one, and leave us a comment and let's talk about it.
But we both agree, right, that the Big 12 could end up being the most competitive
Hell yes.
conference in college football. It could be like competitive in a sense of parity, right? Of good fun games to watch. I'm really excited to watch the Big 12. I don't think it's something that you just tune out. And I do think that it is slightly better than the ACC. It's just they don't have a Florida State like the ACC has, or maybe Clemson. I don't know. Clemson's kind of sliding. So, and Miami just continues to prove that they can't be relevant anymore. But I agree with you. I don't think they're relevant for a national championship, but it is going to be a fun season to watch.
Yeah. Hey, and they've got a bye. So whoever wins that Big 12 for now has got a bye and an automatic berth. So we are going to see the Big 12 in the college football playoff no matter what. Yeah, this past year, if we would have had 12 teams, guess which 2 Big 12 teams would have been in the 12-team playoff? Texas and Oklahoma. So that was kind of my point. That the blue bloods are leaving, and we'll see what the Big 12 can do without the big boys hanging around. And I mean, gosh, Oklahoma carried that conference there for a while, man. I mean,
Yep.
Lincoln Riley, when he was there, he absolutely carried that conference and took Oklahoma to some really, really, really big games, and one of the best offenses we've ever seen when Baker Mayfield was there. So we'll have to see what the Big 12 can do without these 2 big blue blood programs. Let's jump into this South Carolina talk, shall we? Look, the South Carolina Gamecocks came off a pretty rough season. Okay. They missed a bowl game. Rough season. Spencer Rattler off to the NFL. I think Spencer Rattler, first of all, was one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the SEC last year. This guy was sacked an unbelievable amount of times in some of these games. I think specifically the North Carolina game, I think they sacked him 9 or 10 times. Unbelievable just grit and determination from that kid. And I feel like we saw that kid grow up a lot. But he's gone. He's going off to the NFL. You've got Sellers at quarterback. That I feel like I think he's ready to step up. Have you heard much about this Sellers guy?
I have. I've heard. I don't want to sit here and try to pretend I know his whole scouting report, but we'll break this team down after spring practice for sure. But I'm hearing good things about Sellers.
Yeah.
I think that they feel pretty good about where he's at in his progression. I think that if they didn't feel good about where he was, then they probably were not going to be able to draw in James Coley before he took off for Georgia. So I think that there's some buzz around this quarterback, and there's some belief that he's gonna lead them to a pretty promising offense.
Yeah. I mean, We'll see what Lenora Sellers can do. I like the prospect of him being able to use his legs. That he's got some pretty good scrambling ability from what I understand. I think that's going to be paramount for this offense. You got to be able to move around a lot because I don't think this offensive line is going to be just amazing or anything like that. But they brought in another quarterback too, Robbie Ashford. So you've got Robbie Ashford kind of sitting in the wings. At least he's got some playing experience. Anytime you've got a running quarterback, you really need two running quarterbacks. Somebody to go in and run that system if your starter gets hurt, right? So I think you've got kind of like a 1A and 1B for the quarterback position at South Carolina. So I think that's a really good thing. Now you lose some good wide receivers. You got Trey Knox in to play tight end from Arkansas. Trey Knox was a highly touted recruit. I feel like we haven't really seen him at his best. You got another tight end coming in, Joshua Simon coming in from Western Kentucky. Jaron Willis coming in from Ole Miss to play the edge position. So Eddie Lewis coming in to play wide receiver. So he comes over from Memphis. You got some pieces coming in. I feel like they've done a good job hitting the transfer portal hard. But look, it is South Carolina, and there's going to be some holes in this lineup as Shane Beamer has got to figure this stuff out pretty quickly. So you start off the year with Old Dominion, and then you go to Kentucky, and then you got LSU. So those first three games, you got a couple of SEC games there, the 7th and 14th of September, and second game of the year there, you're going on the road to Kentucky, which will be pretty tough atmosphere the second game of the year. Everybody's going to be fired up over there at Kroger Field. So I suspect that'll be a good one. I'll have my peepers on that game for sure. But some of the bigger games of the year at Alabama, at Oklahoma, back-to-back weeks there at the middle part of October, and then you've got a bye week before you go play your rival Texas A&M. Still can't figure out why they're rivals, but they are. And then you've got Missouri, and then you finish the year at Clemson. So that's November 16th. You got Missouri at home, and then at Clemson to finish out the year. South Carolina, over the last, 10 years, has had one of the hardest schedules in college football just because of the mere fact that they had to play Georgia every year and they've had to play Clemson every year. So now you add in Alabama and Oklahoma to this. And LSU. This is a pretty damn tough schedule. What are your thoughts on this? And what are some games that kind of stick out to you? I barely mentioned the Ole Miss game.
I think Kentucky and South Carolina is a game in week 2 that I'm really going to be paying attention to. And playing tug of war there on the banner. But Kentucky, to me, they bring in Brock Vandagriff, and this isn't a Kentucky review, but they bring in Brock Vandagriff. They bring in some pass catching weapons. I think that they get an upgrade on the offensive side of the football this year. They've been a very tough physical team on defense, notoriously, under Mark Stoops. And I think that could be a really big win for Carolina. You're not going to know it in week 2 what kind of win that is, but both schools will be starting a first-year starter at quarterback, and unless Robbie Ashford ends up winning, but I think that this could be a very fun game to watch. Obviously, LSU, you've got to go into that game knowing you're playing upset, right? The good news is that LSU comes to Williams-Brice Stadium, and that's not a very fun place for other teams to play. So that stadium is going to be raucous. It's going to be a fun environment to be at. And if they get the upset, it could make Shane Beamer's career. Honestly, this would be a huge win for him for South Carolina. But Ole Miss this year, it's going to be very, very tough to beat. Alabama is still going to be tough. I know everybody's thinking that, Nick Saban's gone and this is the time to, go after Alabama and this is the time to beat them. They're still going to be a tough out, y'all. And South Carolina, if they beat Alabama, it is saying something for sure. Oklahoma is no pushover. I mean, the schedule lets up towards the end, but that the first 7 games there, that's pretty dang tough. That's a full plate for South Carolina. It's not as tough as it was last year, but that's still a full plate. No Georgia on this schedule. So I think that South Carolina feels like they finally got a schedule that is fair for them, because the past few years, really under Shane Beamer, they've had one of the toughest schedules in the country. And I think that they're going to have to hit this one out of the park. I'm not saying 10 wins or anything like that, but I think that, you could pretty much say that 8 wins with this schedule would be a successful year. And that should be what Shane Beamer is aiming for.
How
I'm
many
excited.
wins you say?
8 wins. 8 wins is,
Yeah.
I think, would be a very successful year. In the new SEC, 8 wins is pretty dang good. That's trending up for South Carolina. That's going to be a tough mark to hit, but this is a team now under Shane Beamer that should be going bowling, pretty much year in and year out. I'm expecting Shane Beamer to have sort of a Mark Stoops effect in that, 8 wins might be the ceiling for them for now, but you're not gonna lose more than 5 games either, and that's kind of what I'm expecting from Beamer moving forward. To me, this schedule, Texas A&M could be really tough at the latter part of the year with Mike Elko kind of figuring some things out. I think that that's going to be a tough out. So that's one that I'm circling and saying, like, all right, can we win that game? Right? If you win that game, you got some momentum against Missouri. Right now, you're looking at Missouri. Where they at this point in the year. We don't really know, but you got to be looking at Missouri feeling pretty confident that you can win that game. And if you beat Missouri, you sure as hell feel confident about beating Clemson. So, the end of the year, after, I think the bye week is in a really good part of the year at October 26th, just before you go and face Texas A&M. The Texas A&M, if they can win that game, I think that they can domino and end the year undefeated, honestly. And that, or I say undefeated, in the year undefeated in those last 5 games. So go 5-0 to end the year, and that would get them really close to 8 wins already. There's definitely 3 more you can count up at the top. So that could make or break their season, honestly, to me.
Yeah. Well, as we were talking here, I wanted to look up the over-under win total, and as of right now, FanDuel, I believe this is FanDuel, says that the over-under win total has been set at 5.5 for the Gamecocks.
Yep. That sounds about right to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's LSU, Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Clemson, and Missouri. That's where this season is decided. I mean, obviously. And, man, that's a tough schedule. Whew. That's got to be one of the toughest schedules in the country, for sure.
Yeah, they've got 4 guaranteed wins, pretty much.
Yeah.
And Vandy's not going to be, I mean, they're no easy out for South Carolina. That's a losable game for South Carolina. They probably won't lose, but, Vandy has won some SEC games here recently and beat Kentucky, and beat Florida. So they're not exactly a for sure out anymore. Not for a team like South Carolina.
No, we can't take any wins for granted as a South Carolina Gamecocks. That's for sure. They've got their work cut out for them. It's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be a great 2024 season, and we're gearing up for it already, getting our feelers out for these teams early, and we hope that you are enjoying doing that. Thank you all so much for watching. We're going to cut these up into segments, and we're going to see you all next week. We hope that you'll like the videos, comment, chit chat with us. We're very responsive on all the comments and everything. We thank you all so much for watching and commenting, as you always do. We hope that everybody has a great night, and we will see you next week.
Thanks. Have a good night.